Public policy, what is it and who makes it? You often hear the word public policy used quite a bit when discussing government. And public policy is another way of talking about what our government does, whether we're talking about the federal government, state, or even the local. So when we think of public policy, it's really our government's position or stance or the rules that our government makes on a variety of issues. So if you think back to what federalism is, remember federalism is that there are some things that the federal government and the state and local governments all can do. For example, taxes. There's the federal taxes, there's state taxes, and there are local taxes. All three forms of our government, federal, state, and local, all have some power and duties when it comes to taxes or the money that they collect for those taxes. So, for example, law enforcement. We have federal law enforcement, we have state law enforcement, we have local law enforcement. That's what federalism is. But then there are also some parts of federalism that say that there are certain things that only the federal government can do. For example, giving you a passport, making treaties with other countries. That's federalism. That's a role of the federal government. Whereas federalism also, this idea of federalism also says that there are certain things that only the state can do. For example, marriage licenses. That's a state issue. Federal government can't do it. The local government can't do it. You don't get a City of Columbus marriage license. Now, you may go to the county and get a license, but it's controlled and regulated by the state. And there are certain things that the local government does. There's really no state trash collection. There's no federal water for you to drink. This is all things that are provided by the local government. So federalism, remember, is a way of thinking about our government, the three parts of our government, the national, the state, and local, that they share some duties, but then some things are very distinct to each branch, or each level, federal, state, and local. So when we think of public policy, this is government action, whether we're talking federal or state or local, to tackle a problem of society. So public policy is government action to tackle a problem of society. And sometimes public policy could be no government action. The government chooses not to do something. But most of the time, if it's a big issue, the government will get involved, either the federal government, the state, or local. So if you just look at this slide, there's a variety of things that we think that Americans expect a certain level of government activity on, whether we're talking about school lunches or even to have public schools, clean drinking water, protecting animals, public safety and health, the environment, the fact that you have to wear a seatbelt in a car, right? That's government policy saying you will wear a seatbelt, and the government tells auto manufacturers you must put seatbelts in cars. Now, of course, seatbelts aren't free, so these manufacturers of automobiles and trucks, they have to pay for these things. They wouldn't probably do it if the government didn't tell them to. I mean, they may if the public really, really wanted vehicles with seatbelts and they knew that the importance of them. But historically, the federal government had to mandate that manufacturers of automobiles must have seatbelts. And obviously, seatbelts have gotten fancier and more advanced with over time. They used to just be lap belts. Now they go across your lap and your shoulder, across your chest, and of course airbags and all the technology that has come along. That's been government public policy has been pushing auto manufacturers to do it. That's just one example. There are lots of things, a variety of things. But we'll talk more about that and these issues in this video talk and in the other public policy video talk. For this one, let's just focus on the federal level. So remember, there's federalism, which says federal, state, and local. For this one, let's just talk about federal public policy. Okay, so these would be policies that are made by our federal government, either the Congress or the president, and in some cases, even the judicial branch, the Supreme Court and the federal courts can get involved in setting public policy. So this is all the federal. So generally, Congress makes the laws, and these laws create the national public policy. So if you think about the seatbelts or protecting wildlife, whether the bald eagle or the black-footed ferret, making sure there's drinking water that's clean across the country, or that businesses are handicap accessible, there's so many public policy issues. Generally, the Congress takes the lead, makes the laws, or makes these policies. Sometimes they can allow the executive branch to create some public policy, but probably 85% of all public policy at the federal level is made by Congress. Once in a while, the White House, the President of the United States, has some power to make some public policies. Generally, the President would be the one responsible for enforcing those public policies, those laws created by Congress. So, for example, if Congress wants a public policy protecting the bald eagle, it would be up to the President and the President's team to make sure that those public policies are enforced. So, the bald eagle law, protecting it, if there were people who violated that law, they could be hunted down, tracked down by the President's law enforcement part of his cabinet, which we'll talk about in a moment. But again, the President does have some ability to issue executive orders, which can create public policy for a short while, because again, it doesn't have the power of law. So if a president were to issue an executive order and then a new president were to be elected, well, the new president could reverse the executive order. A new president cannot come in and reverse a law passed by Congress. That's law. The Congress would have to overturn the law, and that doesn't happen very easily. But generally what happens is the president will enforce public policy passed by Congress or issue some executive orders, and then it falls on the president's cabinet to make sure that the laws that are passed by Congress, the public policy, or the executive orders issued by that president are enforced. So if we think about the bald eagle law, that would fall under the Department of Interior, because the Department of Interior handles wildlife. So the president's workers or officials, and sometimes in cases like this, law enforcement would work to enforce the bald eagle public policy. So the president has agents who work in the Department of Interior, fish and wildlife agents who would make sure that there's no one out there hurting eagles or doing things that would damage eagles or the eagle's nest or eagle's eggs, any of that. But again, this is public policy passed by Congress, and it falls on the president to make sure that those parts of that public policy are enforced. But again, that's just one example. Whether you think of any issue that would be public policy, vaccinations might be public policy. That falls under the Health and Human Services Department. So the president's team that works for the president in the Department of Health and Human Services, they would make sure that happens, the vaccinations happen. If we're talking about school lunches and how people and kids in school get lunches and maybe even breakfast, if there are lots of students who arrive at school hungry in the morning, the Department of Education would be the one who implements that policy. So the Congress might pass it, but then it falls on the Department of Education to make it happen. And you could look at this chart and you can see the cabinet, and you can think of all the things that happened in America, and a lot of that falls on the cabinet. Speaking of food, the food that you eat is inspected, right, by the United States Department of Agriculture. So when you buy meat, for example, it says USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. So the president, people who work for him in the Department of Agriculture, inspect the food, make sure that the food we eat in this country is safe. That is public policy. We want to make sure that our food is safe. It falls on the USDA, Department of Agriculture, to make sure that the food we eat won't harm us. So take a look at this chart. You can see every cabinet level and just the responsibility that each of them have. If you don't know what each one does, a lot of times you can look at the logo or the seal and you can kind of see the responsibility. Department of Commerce is business, as in .com. That's what the .com means. It means commercial or commerce. So that department would enforce public policy dealing with businesses. Homeland Security, that's pretty self-explanatory. Energy, self-explanatory. Department of Transportation, that is a lot of parts of America where we're talking about planes or boats or highways, ports coming in. It's just a major, major part of our government. So public policy generally made by Congress, but falls on these departments to enforce it. Another one that's not on the basically cabinet level, meaning the director of the Environmental Protection Agency is not in line to be president should something happen to the president, but generally this director goes to cabinet meetings to make sure that public policy dealing with the environment is enforced. So companies can't pollute, littering, and all these things fall within the Department of, or within the Environmental Protection Agency. So think about all the public policy dealing with the environment. Even if we look back at one of the original slides here, all of these things do have a lot of overlap. So whether we're talking about hurting the environment, it can have an impact on bald eagles. If your farmers are using pesticides that hurt the eagles when they eat the fish, somehow through the runoff that gets in the fish system, eagle eats the fish, and then the eagle's eggs aren't very sturdy. That happened quite a bit, and the eagles were on the brink of extinction. We figured it out. The Environmental Protection Agency, along with the Department of Interior and the Fish and Wildlife folks, we've now brought back the American bald eagle to be pretty populated around the country in certain states. But public policy is government action on a variety of issues. It's hard to cover all of them in a talk like this, but hopefully you understand that it's a wide range of issues. I think about all the things that you care about, that your parents might care about, that people in your family care about, whether we're talking seatbelts or wildlife or vaccinations or drinking water or educational issues. Pretty much any issue that you're thinking of has been thought of and dealt with by the American government, either on the national level, state, or local. If it's a major, major issue, it's probably been dealt with on the federal level. Remember, there's really nothing new under the sun, and most people have thought about all of the issues that you're thinking about. And so generally there is probably a public policy on the issues that you care about. But how can you affect public policy? You're not too young to get involved. If there's an issue that you care about and you don't think our federal government has gone far enough, then it's your right and maybe your responsibility to get involved, whatever issue it is. And maybe there's an issue that the government hasn't tackled yet. It's up to you. It's up to those who care about the country and the planet to get involved. So if there's something that you think the government, the federal government, or even state or local has not really addressed and there needs to be more public policy on, don't be afraid to jump right in. It's your country too.